당연히 그시 제산당한도 녀몽바디 당한주 아주 코알레 코르체 코알레 마타르와체 디니기 다들 봐도 코안 예죄바디 가르쳐 봤으네 녀몽비 온게 제바레 녀몽바디 아주 준송바 나신제네 녀몽바디기 아주 코알레 마타와체 각가제 샤한디 녀몽바디레스 지사다 녀몽바디기 아니야 주게 체들은 동안용화 맞에 안에 마음반에 깨와 치마에 양가선 마치지 동안용화 제바디 녀모바디 지고레스 지사다 녀모바디 가와 요레스는 아주게 삼나로 셈나로 여바자 안그 아주게 셈나게 녀모바 차다디 아주 녀모바 제 자와나신 아주 디나레 취되바 자와나는 취되바나 지레 녀모바 자와나는 취되여레 디네자 녀모바디 마방바도 안솔이야 대화세디 and the Lucy Dewana, Mebare, Denza, Numo, Mebare, says on to shit. Then that on the Numo body, as a travel when it did Numo body, that's just a Numo body never do, and Jepa, Nimbo Danger, Jumbo remember so Jumbo is, or Lucian as kissing, and the Negi, a Koshigara.
Good evening. Last week, we continued to look at the role the afflictions play within our life. Not just this life, but in each and every life up to this point. It's these afflictions that create our own prison of samsaric suffering. This is something we need to come to. This is something we need to come to recognize for ourselves with vivid clarity, so that we come to see the very real need to eliminate our afflictions. And the place that these afflictions abide is not outside of us, but within our own mind. And they've been abiding there, appearing in various forms and guises since beginningless time. And over this period, they've only caused us harm and suffering. They are, in fact, the sole reason why we experience physical and mental suffering. Therefore, these afflictions and these afflictions alone are suitable to be called our enemy. Therefore, we need to rely on the antidotes so as to weaken and eventually eradicate the afflictions. So this is what we've been continuing to look at over the last few weeks.
바위에 띵고 그래서도 바위에 띵고서도 셈 밤에가 지켜 말해서 그래서 셈 밤에 발라도 아주 셈데 녀모 기위 초르파 당샤바들라 녀모 기를 마송와지 파 녀모 초르파 당치 셈 녀모 원도 조주바이나 셈 밤에가 제발해서 제가 될려 녀모 파 기를 파 숭구에는 숭제 근데 파 조마주의 기위 초 당만나 그래서 바위에 제발해서 바위에 받아 밤에 봐야 돼 두수모로 제가 되니기 바위에 된제는 아주게 되는 반년보 때도 녀모보 년보 때 검도 녀 바위에 된 거로 봐 제가 녀심 녀모보 쳐서 마당와 될래 년보 때 검고서 바위에 된 거로 봐.
Amongst the many antidotes to the afflictions, maybe you could say a foundational antidote, or a foundational consciousness, a consciousness that one has to rely on as a foundation, is that of conscientiousness. Because if one lacks conscientiousness, even if one is aware of the afflictions and their faults, one will do nothing about it. One will follow the afflictions. But if one relies on conscientiousness, then one will be on guard for the afflictions, and when one sees them, eradicate them. So therefore, being conscientious is indispensable to be able to overcome and eventually eradicate the afflictions.
Dine jepene 저 컨트롤이 마게니엘이야 컨트롤 계세기 지 유철파 마삼마 가서 대철 삼당외나 컨트롤 유 셈디 아니 컨트롤 계획에 내가 여러 봐 컨트롤 계세기 즉 dene delia of the conduct the niggas same the conduct yudil pa madawaje di cholam some madawaje or di daning conduct on the yaboyo mara samje pa sem dusine sem di bar sun shavena and conduct marwa jeza sun deja ba me ba sun wasi ro de sun wasi jeza dang zu chujum sun de lunga yisu nieje de chujum sun de ba yi ding go de ba yi ding 그래서 내 오다 니 nga yu kone shen le nöbige nöbachina ya wo mare sembe samdaidu dele sungorwa jesa sem nga ba me da sung dene sungorwa dinajin ani lu yu kone shen le nöna ya wo mare sembe ani yi yu kone shen la nöbe samakena ya wo mare sembe sem sung yodu de sung yodu da shen le nöbale ni jigi nöba chebale pa di ya wo mare sembe samdu sungorwa jesa di jigi yo mare sembe sungor jesa di churum sung ya de 저기 바위된 거래 바위된지는 느끼위 수름송에도 개월 차교로와 지난해서 sem 밤에 델레 송제 바위된도 개와지상 수름송에도 유명해서 이지도 받게다 바위된 거래 수름송 거와
to engage in the foundational training of ethical restraint, the foundational training in that all one's spiritual development comes about independent on the cultivation of ethics. To be able to ethically restrain oneself, one has to rely on conscientiousness. If one is not conscientious, one will not be able to be ethical. One will not be able to restrain one's physical behavior, one's speech, or one's mind within the restraints or within the boundaries of what is and is not ethical. Because if one lacks conscientiousness, one will not be guarding one's mind. One's mind can just follow what it is habituated to, and that will be the afflictions. But if one is training in conscientiousness or relying on conscientiousness so that one can be ethical, one will be able to guard one's mind in this way, protect one's mind from the influence of the afflictions. So, for example, to develop the mind of conscientiousness, one can reflect on and generate a determination that acting in a way that brings harm to others or even to myself is not acceptable. Perhaps speaking in a harsh way or being angry, these are inappropriate for a practitioner of the Dharma. I do not want to be that person. I do not want to have that impact on others. Therefore, this way of thinking enables conscientiousness to play its role. So that, for example, when one is going into an encounter where you know your afflictions may well be stimulated, you may well experience anger, for example. Having developed this strong determination that comes about through seeing that it's inappropriate to be angry with others, to have a harsh response to others, one then, relying on conscientiousness, goes into this situation on guard, guarding one's mind, taking care of one's mind, that in relationship to this person or this situation, one doesn't allow anger, for example, to arise. Because this is how anger comes. Anger arises in relation to something. It has an object that leads to its arisal. So when you know that you are in danger of anger arising, with conscientiousness, one has the determination to guard one's mind. Then one can practice ethics. One can ethically restrain one's mind, and therefore one's speech and physical behavior. This is why conscientiousness is such an important mind to rely on.
나 되네요. 먼저 대뇨 이시고래 녀몽이 꽤 삼다셔야지 발방공에서 될이야 디링 마셔야 될이야 라신 치유 동어 규의 녀모다 유릉어는 다르치 내기 시험을 되어봐양 다동 춘지 포부 동어 캐세네 되마 두버 칠쇼 제벌 미제나 온디만.
We'll continue in the text with the 37th verse in the 4th chapter. So this is still under the large outline of conscientiously abandoning the afflictions or relying on conscientiousness to abandon the afflictions. And here we're looking at how it is unsuitable to ever tire of the difficulty involved with abandoning the afflictions. So the 37th verse. Those whose afflictions lead to suffering due to their inevitable death, when lined up on a battlefield, vigorously wanting to destroy, disregard the pain of being pierced by weapons of arrows and spears, and stand their ground, refusing to give way until their objective is achieved.
Da ranshin chiwe sidi da nga zo kowa ba diki le da nyumo kowa gile kamsum kowa kando geba ina simjen tamje da ku shenji gi sui mogo ba chi kor sui khen mea na yang ko ranshin gi ane chiru kore shigires jizan di shiwa di ane le da nyumo be wangi rangwa be ba chi kores jizan di soso la rangwa yo soso shigi mea samna ane kang shi ka tuya ma mene korangi legi nuba zo chi yondu ni shiwi dusul ba yondu ni shiwa de kang ya ka tuya yo ma des me banza deni ge chiwa de da ranshin ge dusin de shen ji ge sui mo ba ji koran ranshin du chi ru go le ji de ranshin sai de shen da ji ge sui ji yang zu so wa de ge me ba ma sui ba ji koran nye ma ge nuba du zo ji ani ma shi zhe ji ru wa de ranshin chi wa ji 마다야 지라 현지의 먹어와 제 랑기 냐마게 누버 소화제니 기인지 제 누버 내다 시르 정루와 지다 랑시 시와시고데 다시 샘젠 자합대 지기 두신 쇠바 마인 바제 아니 그런기 냐마 레사바 레이 오 누버 소화시 마시르디 라신 시와 디네 치와디 치유 동화세 오라 치유 동화 지사다 계명아 줄야 계유 동화 치유 동화 나유 동화신 제 계가 가유 동화, 계유 동화, 가유 동화, 네 치유 동화세 계가 나숨이 동화세 디수로 제가 디니게 라신지 치유도 용거래스.
The first line of the Tibetan starts with the words we have at the end of the first line, that of inevitable death. Death being inevitable is the situation for each and every ordinary being. Each and every ordinary being will inevitably die. And this is because the very potential for death abides within us. Because this rebirth that we have taken was propelled by or under the control or power of our afflictions and contaminated karma. Therefore, this contaminated karma and our afflictions will determine that this life will eventually end. Our death is inevitable. It cannot be entirely prevented. We can look after ourselves, but we cannot entirely prevent death. There is no need for an external cause, another person or situation, to cause our death. The potential for our inevitable death abides within. And this will lead to suffering. So in the various ways of that suffering is presented, one is the suffering of birth, aging, sickness, and death. This then refers to the suffering of death.
마시와 선비 내가 비나야 동아용야다 베비 동아 대기위 동아 가위 동아용 되니게다 뇨모다 세대다 뇨모베 샤완진의 규벽에 뇨모베 샤완진의 규와 라와미비기 다 셈젠티기에서 셈젠 코와바세우스 되니시 고고르다.
For every being who is circling without any control or freedom in cyclic existence, we will all inevitably or naturally die. This is our natural state. And thereby we continuously can and do and will continue to do so, experience the sufferings of birth, aging, sickness, and death. This is just the natural state of being bound within this prison of suffering.
Zanda simjian kowa ba di nigi ningji yu, ningji yu res. Aresina ko shen nyomo be shangwa do ju rangwa me ba an dunga nyoa chi yu, ka ki yu dunga, ka yu dunga, ane chi yu dunga nyongo ba, ta nyomo be rangwa do ju du ba za, ko ane di nigi nyomo be shangwa jendo yu wa re. Tezang gansa kola rangwa me ba nyomo be shangwa do ju wa za da, di nigi simjian di ningji yu res achi.
Such beings are suitable to be an object of compassion. All of them are suitable as objects of compassion because despite yearning for happiness, for a state of lasting happiness, such beings continue to suffer against their will. They have no freedom. They are prisoners in the prison of their own making. They continue to suffer and therefore are worthy of compassion.
예전에 디니기 저 선보 네비 링라 안에 가르치고래서네 다 녀몽배 샤와진의 송제 디니 가르치고서네 융어 달세 nenyi shombar deba yangsi. Jesa pui de yang anzo le chao yin ngi anzo chao yin se de ne pa ma ji yu se ma ja se ro jesa ma ja kwa chu go se de yu mo dar se bang te se ko ba ji pui de yang anzo nu wo kon zong anzo chao de jesa di ma anzo pa zhong go ko me ba so go se je an pa yu mo le pa an ji 방티지 마제가 배수시 nenji 배수시제 시험벌 되어서 파서 매번 써야 된다라 두스투고를 마제고래 마제가 두고래지 용어 다르기 달세 nenji 시험벌 되어봐 양스.
The second line describes the all too common behavior of the beings referred to in the first line, us ordinary samsaric beings. Lining up the imageries of a traditional battlefield. And this is a position people have been placing themselves in for millennia, lining up to face who they believe to be their enemies as a route by which they believe happiness will be achieved. Line up with a vigorous determination to destroy.
다른 간주 대사 예수 망부 고야 여도와 제사 유용어래 판정이 자오래서는 마자도 대사 되차 공도 수랑철라 차비기 차파 신 디스코송이 됐던 간주 자오라 간주 뉴거서 바티텔 당와게 되는 바 시험바 되게 고도 마잡디 저거 와다디 녀모보기 녀모베 되차 랑철라 차비 차바다 신철라 단위 당와 는 공조 니 지금 기디게 남이 마시 몽바 마리바 니왕게다 몽바다 풍콩도다 나야다 간주 배 코즈레 간주 원가징아도 톱치거래 간주 코토그레 간주 세데 나야 예제되는 되샤 콩도 나야 마리바 디기 차다디 바 원도 규르시네 되네 파셔 대파 점기 코즈 매바 쓰긴세 두스네 네 배제제제 안지 마제가 로레세디 난 대상은 저기 당원에서 통신받은 망부 자격을 받아야 되는 거죠. 당원에서 자격을 받아야 되는 소야돼.
The second line, I don't need to explain it much to you. We see this in our world. It's still all too common. Reacting in the same way, believing somehow this time the result will be different. And what it all comes down to is as it has for millennia. Ignorance, leading to attachment, leading to anger. So in particular, this ignorance misperceiving reality, misperceiving the I and therefore the mine, leads to attachment, leads to anger. So in this next sentence, listen out for these words, me and my, because this is the sign of the ignorance, self-grasping, where one relates to one's enemies with these thoughts. They are trying to dominate me. They are trying to take away my happiness. They are trying to take away the happiness of my loved ones. So from this ignorance that misapprehends reality follows attachment to myself and others and my wishes, my wants. And from this attachment then comes anger to those that we perceive as hindering the fulfillment of our attachment, the fulfillment of our desires and wishes. This is what's happening in our world today, and it has been for millennia. These same three root poisons causing all suffering.
And the next to go is there's a part jump shaking, person never shaking, and Bezu Shishi, this Maja Dustin, to go is. Deva, young kid to Drona, and the Garja was in a Pa Maja to Sule Nubiji Adami, Shanda, Chezan Sulia, Dadung, Chunyo Poppy, Dunga Kesenes, Chezan Dadung, Pa Maja to Sule and me, Shandadiki Sulia, and Arzole Tajaya, Dadung, Chela, so Jixanja, Uvala, so much in the Jingo, Sosolia. And Jigga Gangpada, Lava, the Lilia, Masuaba, the nation, Masin, Naseta, the Sosolia Ganga Jigores, or that don't change your poppy, Dungal said.
When the afflictions are strong and dominant within, and one is deluded about reality, one doesn't just sit peacefully, one acts under the influence of this delusion. And this is then when the lined up armies take action. The third line, disregard the pain of being pierced by weapons of arrows and spears. So now we see the physical action that follows and the resulting suffering coming from these root causes, the afflictions.
On the Nigi social mission that Pama Jadu to Suli and its Sosolia and Daja and Chen, Dungla so Zuchi, Sosola Gangba Neba, Laba Neba, Lule, Masu Neba, do se Ganga Mambu Jay, Javina, the new Ganga Kedu Session, Gangadilia, Chick, Pa Nang Garso Kedu, Gangadilia, Jim Mazemba Jay, the new other Dum Madu, but a chill shock, Jewel Mijenas. Just now, 2 didn't never survey now, the new Pa Pui the Majum Babadonga, Jig Dugme, said Pa Lodugme, chill shocks, said Pa Germany the Gangba, Watanga Masu, Nasu, said some jet, Mazu Pa Yabru Church, Yanja Lord, Jewas in Dredo, as you are, didn't to go Malaysia. Janang the new, the new Sosugi, and the Gangba Nabala, the name Masu Nasu, Gang and Chevine, the new person, and he put the Majum Bardo, Meva Masu Bardo, not. And Drugimes, Machilo mess and Drugimes and Lucian Pa, Sosugi, Ganga, Dinish Chevene, Ganga de la Kedo, Dunga de la Kedo, Sueje, and Lucian, Gasor Penny, Maja Go Regida.
When these afflictions are strong, we continue without wavering to act under their influence. In other words, because of our mind being dominated by the afflictions, we lack the capacity, we do not have the ability to recognize our mind is completely deluded, completely afflicted. And thinking in this way, the values that ideally should guide people and at better times perhaps would, these get perverted by these afflictions. And this then gets expressed in the fourth line. And stand their ground, refusing to give way until their objective is achieved. And see, this we can imagine in the kind of battles being described, where one falls down with one's body pierced and in pain, but one stands up immediately, continues to fight, with a mind still vigorously wanting to destroy these enemies before you, with a determination to continue fighting until they all have been vanquished. This is how the afflicted mind continues to create the causes for ongoing suffering.
Tamala Ranshin Yi, Jisum over Ranshin Jidano, Missun, she, Shen Yu Sun, she, Yungure, Shen Yi Masubaje, and the Kor Masubane, or Ranshin Yi, Korsui, Nubadi Yamjin, Pashi to Yungores, then the Chivituma said the Yungores, and the Sun beating the layer, the Nina, Sun beating the layer, and the Sosugu led and Yokas and Yomo Bisham, Jamon de Sonje, and this Ranshola. Chapa and Shenchola Dawa, and then Naja, and Chikatato, Diwong Yomo, Wongi, Shenlia, or Disney Tower, said you could. Just the China, Gary, me, Chigina, so Gary Tona, or Dingy Tower, and Tubuja Jorwa, me, Ger, me Chigina, Tubuja Yorwa, Pacho Dingy Tower, said Gina, Chiba, Mambochi, or Church, and Nanzu, Yahaprik, Nanzu Tower, and Majada. 미jer 지부이나 길 아는 딩이 자월에서 될 맞아 그 투자 증가줘야 용거로와 그래서 녀몽배 차단게 온게 두고래서 때 된다는 충충지 마도요 말이지 된다 충충 마도요 말된다 침보스가에 말이지 제가 딘데 조디깔로 파 조디깔 안 비샹기야 소슬레 뇌제 소슬레 네바단 강발라바 마셔발라서 소슬 동안 가지 녀베네 드누베 배주제제 오퍼기 등이 맞좀 봐도 나디 동아들이야 지금 마셈바지 펀이 추 징기 셈비게 삼다제 동아디 소슬 동아디 동아 키로 쇠진 징구도 와스 되네게 강아 지 배주제 두부도 와서 월다 배로 차고디 배
The reality of the situation for us samsaric beings is that death for all of us is inevitable. And the reason for our death, however it comes, is the afflictions and the contaminated karma that was accumulated and other afflictions later ripen. So whether one experiences what would be called a natural death, the inevitable death of human beings, or one brought forward by something, for example, such as violence, the cause of our death is our afflictions and the contaminated karma they have accumulated. And it's through our afflictions that through our mind being afflicted, we completely misconstrue who or what is our actual enemy. And this is why we find ourselves in this world perceiving individuals as our enemy, or as perceiving a group, a particular type of person as our enemy. This is because of our afflictions, our mind being afflicted. We misconstrue the cause of our suffering and pain. And we misconstrue the causes that would otherwise lead to happiness. So the reality of our situation, furthermore, is that what one gets afflicted about, the objects that lead to the arisal of the afflictions, in almost all circumstances, they are insignificant. As we saw in the verse last week, we become enraged at harm that is slight and short-lived. What stirs us up, whether it's with desire or with anger or any other affliction, for the greater expanse of time, is something of no value. It has no essence. Yet we create the causes for suffering.
Dinige samdaido nadina sungwana shinga samdavine jingazo demorete jike jik boxen zehendige yorwada desu kono 가서 kono de marade kono 주기 아자에다 착봐 yorwa 소소를 차봐 소소기 땀 년자라 차봐 아디 톱네 곧 마음이 진짜 저승이 톱에나 가려야 아니 민치보 깨라 차이를 선배 소소야 땀 년자라 차봐 아니 가지 부유에 선배게 곧네 톱을 선배게 나야 예제 아니 되는 바 지슈리 다에도 소소야 동다 마다 되는 차된바데 되는 배저 이제 동아 가서 두세 마셔 강한 때문에 되는 배저지 지기도 하대 대서 제사 돈달라 담년다 차바게 차바 충충지기 되니 돈다 충충지기야 소소야 강아 가서 때나 강아디 동아디게 직 동리야 마셔야다 차된 되니기 소소를 쉬는 수보는 나서 가서 보고 있네 되게네 되니기 동아디 계도 수여신 인증거로 봐 토야기 돈달이야 제사 되니 삼단한 저기 도스진에 저기 무인의 소리지 디나 소만하신 동의의 차기도 어디서
We can see the deluded mind, the afflicted mind, playing itself out. In some situations, it's incredibly clear. So if you take watching what, for us as probably just television viewers, what for us is just a spectacle, and that it would be a boxing match. So as viewers, one would want to view it as a form of entertainment. And for those two individuals involved in this boxing match, they are likely to be well trained. They are likely to have developed a motivation to engage in this fight. And they're likely to have a limit of control over their mind, so they're not blinded by anger, but their mind is still pervaded by strong afflictions. Of course, ignorance at the root. From this attachment and pride, they have this wish to dominate another person, to prove their dominance over someone else to others. In particular, if it's a formidable opponent, they want to gain fame and reputation from being able to dominate that particular human being, and through this gain wealth and prestige. These are, of course, entirely afflicted or deluded motivations. And from that motivation, they endure a beating, they endure physical harm that in just about no other circumstance would be considered acceptable. But yet, they are spurred on, encouraged by their own afflictions and by the afflictions of others too.
Dunga kido sene duen madruba chisho jebar mije na se di donde dinga de zemole ja shosarawa de ji gan le ya da chun gi ben yungor da ze ne gi shembor de ba ya da dong chun gi po be dunga kese ne se di ya ma ja da pa chu bu ja jing ya pa che ja an de ne dunga kido sene duen madruba chisho bar jeba mije na se de an zemole le 아니 고소소게 토브 마토 받으니 토바 지기세비 소소래 수보라 나사까지 강하되나 가제다나 디둥아디기 파케도 세진 오당이 토바 지기세비기다 소소도나 주야라야 베제진네 아니 진거로 와다 제몰레 디노와 지산디소 직 차상 제반나 마다 주부기야라체 어디마 한 차가마 둥아케도 세네 되마르바 치쇼 제바야세데 한 제몰레 파 데네레 자야 자셔서로와.
So one can approach the third and fourth line as not as seeing them as linked, but seeing them as distinct, with the third line being explicitly linked to that of warfare. Disregard the pain of being pierced by weapons of arrows and spears. And the fourth line one can relate to as being to do with sport and entertainment, standing their ground, refusing to give away until their objective is achieved. And this is how people approach their lives. It's most clear in times of warfare, but with sport too. In particular, when one sees it as a form of entertainment, which for most it is. And they are prepared to willingly accept tremendous harm and possible real danger for the sake of entertainment.
Ene ma dado dunga kunji gyurgyoba ranshin jade shomjun dala deng dunga jata gyurgyo gangi kyang yiche gilu migyur mojugoes.
This brings us then to the 38th verse. The cause of all continual suffering, this natural enemy within. From today I will strive to definitely destroy it. No matter what multiple further sufferings arise, I will, needless to say, not be pessimistic nor disheartened.
Onda ngaranzu gyula yedige nyomo badigi ane du tato kidine ane chige ngaranzu ya dunga jigo dunga naso badi geba jigores bene setele ine chige kine mashibardo ane dunga ta mara ane chige dunga naso badi ge jigores nyomo be wantishine. Ande maze ane kewa chimaye na dunga nyongoya dunga gyur nyomo ba keba na nyomo ba digi wangi ngasol ma chi dine dunga naso ba nyonga shagores. 제사단 nyomo ba di ngazuge kowa toma me ba ne dadi ba dunga zu kowa la matar wa chi dunga naso ba gabriela an dunga ngasong dunga kabnyewe dunga la so gabriela ne idaye dunga gabriela dunga gabriela lada mi dunga kiwe dunga da kaiwe dunga da chiwe dunga la so ba ane chik denege dunga da mara yaya gyu na so ba di du da do ane dunga ye gyu che ba di nyomo ba di chi gore da do dunga yu ba de jang gyu ge nyomo ba di da du da do a zu le dunga yaya gyu jang jang chi gore yu des.
The first part of this first line, the cause of all continual suffering. So this then draws us back to what we saw, we looked at from about 10 verses ago, the many faults of the afflictions. that they are the cause of all suffering. Every suffering experience we and every other being has ever experienced is due solely to the afflictions. Every suffering that we and every other being have experienced in this life, in our life previous to this and the life previous to that, since beginningless time, every experience of suffering, and not just as a human, but when we were born in the hells, when we were born as a spirit, when we were born as an animal, all our suffering was due to our afflictions. And not just in the low realms, but the high realms, such as a human, and in the various God realms. Every experience of suffering is due to their afflictions. So whether they're the slight sufferings of the gods or the intense suffering of the low realms, this is all the afflictions do, is they harm us. So in this one life, from our birth until our death, because our mind remains afflicted, we will suffer. This is the role they play for us.
Da dine gi ngā zu gila yu di nyomo ba de da rāngshīn ye zhā. Rāngshīn zhā ngōni de di zhā ngōma de di re so da rāngshīn ye zhā ngōma. Da di rāngshīn ye zhā la yu de da di ngā zu le gidi yi ne nyomo ba de zhā se du ngā zu zhā se du so so le nyoba ji khen so so le kāngān ti khen de le nyoba ji khen so so ma ka wa chi de la ngā zu ge zhā wa simi da go wa. Jiza nyomo ba de rāngshīn ye zhā se du gidi yi ne ya Gene sonde suli gidi ne na chik digi yomo ba je sawe chela kanga je ma to yago chya yo mares dires gidi ne dinires ani yomo ba je di je mi chungchu ji mi bu chungchu le ge be ne mi gyo bo ji le ge be ne kanga ti go res yomo ba de mi ding ji le ge be ne kanga ti go res mi chenpo ge ra chenpo ji le yomo ba ge be ne kanga ti go je san yomo ba de ge chin je la cha le kanga ti go ma to di le kanga je di kanga ma ti ma se yo mares nyomo ba chi sa che dene ki ke da del ya ne ka ma de ki bu yong re sa de yo ma ke di ne da nyomo ba de ki sa ye che la ya an ke di ne ya ne chi di de bu ka nga ji du ga jwa ya ma de ya ga ki ne yo me ba za ko le ya ran xin ye zha zhang mo ma di da ma ji ki sim ye den do yu be nyomo ba de re so ran xin ye zha sa de.
First line in the English concludes with this natural enemy within. So this is what the afflictions are for us. They abide within, and they are just the natural state as a samsaric being, as a being who's taken rebirth in any realm due to the contaminated karma and the afflictions. We will suffer due to these afflictions. That is just the natural state of a samsaric being. So generally in society, and so too in the Dharma, when we identify an enemy, when someone is suitable or something is suitable to be called an enemy, it is because they are perceived to cause unwanted situations or to cause harm. Here we need to recognize that enemy, the cause of harm, naturally abides within. And this is the case for all of us samsaric beings and has been throughout all our lives in all realms. So if we think of the human experience, from the smallest, most vulnerable infant to an old person nearing the end of their life, everywhere in between, every experience of pain and misery comes from these afflictions. So reflecting like this, we come to recognize that the afflictions harm us over an infinite period of time. They cause us suffering in limitless ways, and they enslave us in preventing us from ever finding peace.
내가 브링링 안 소리 내가 기타르시 고 뒤식을 주마 동안 저 예내 손대 남상 콜라 마제 자 차고 말에 된 아니 뭐바나 기디나 자 차기에서는 차비 내봐요 말 까불에 아직 다들 먼저 저거에서 말하자 갑자기 마자위네 야 로하시 젤리야 야 튠부차제 조보차야기 고합이 되버와 제가 현재 거 내라신이 자 차고 말에서 뒤식이야 안 찍네 아니 고 거기디네 gyanya mares ngangzulya dati ngangzul tawa ma thimba dushi ngangzulya jawa ngangzul mitin ba che ngangzulya kapde che jawa chade ma do korongi bu da phama da kyo shoboti la nyin chade ro ko go bu chi go wa 제가 그 장신 이고 내가 가실래 자오 제반에 가실래 니 가실래 판도하고 제된 가실래 디기 되고 되고 봐 진짜 니네자 니가지기 치미 셈제나 미세등이 자오세야디 장신이 자스 말에 내가 찍리야 소속이 미팅배 전에建议 토내가 좀 미팅배 차소를 마도 아니 그 년만에 되네 그 기용되네 되는 거 자오 차겨 말에 몽바나 양진간 줄이야 저거 차시 말에 아니 거부차 소소라 판도 제디고 용시 말에 안디 말제 나도 내가 브링다 소소리야 미팅배 지나야 아니 그런 게 아니지 보다 파마다 그런 저보다 지술래 그런 제와체 거부체 컨트롤 니에지 컨트롤 판도 지고 왔어 지금 술리네 그 뇌베 괜찮음도 왔어 녀몽바디 디정미도 그디나 술리네 나주길에 깨나 나줄 강아를 현나 술수길에 깨나야 녀몽바디 세베지라 강아제야마도 판도 유하스 가미도 왔어 지금 녀몽바디 녀마 지게 매바체 다들 내가 강아지 하는 집에서 니야 말이요 몽바디 야마는 끼되어 깨바네 그디 깨베네 강아지 한 장자래서 몽바나 녀몽바디 소소를 판도 두겐 차기래서 니야 차야 말이서 녀몽바디 매바 그디 마저 봐도 녀몽바디 기디께서나 소소리야 강아지 한 차기래 진짜 녀몽바디 라신이 장 원이 장네 장 딩몽원이디 마저 녀몽바디스 아저를 미 내가 마저 되지 먼저 마접사 갑대께서 자오디 그 라신이 말해서 그 내가 브링리아 먼저 미팅 받자 자오스마도 그 라신교 자오 말해 그 가브릴리아 튜브 차시기를 조보 차시기를 라는 판도지간 차시기를 해서 어떤데 디스코다 라신이 자세야 되기 그 해디기 연몽바디다 되네 내가 탐지도 판마도 내가 탐지도 뒤 탐지도 술을 깨봐 있나야 동아기야 짱짱해서 대신 먼저 마자 자오세디 되네 말해서지 되니 캐바시고로다
So we need to challenge this mistaken perception that we're deeply habituated to, which is that our enemies, and therefore our source of suffering, lies without us, or external to us, whether situations or other people. This is completely false. As this line says, there's natural enemy within. So to aid you in your reflection here, think of how a soldier or a sports person views their opponent or their enemy. It's with an attitude that if this enemy were killed or all of their kind were removed from this earth, this world would be a better place. Or a different expression, but for a sports person, they also have the wish to dominate. So this is the usual way in the world to relate to enemies. If I never met this person again, if I was never in this situation again, life would only be better. This is how we think. This shows we perceive these external enemies to be them being enemies to us as being their natural state. But this is completely deluded. Similarly, because we are all too often deceived by our afflictions, believing if I follow an affliction on this occasion, it will be okay. This too is deluded, because afflictions are never our friends. So in this reflection, remind yourself that you will have examples in your own life where people that you have liked have later become people that you despise. So therefore, their natural state is neither a friend nor an enemy. And the converse is equally true. You'll have people that you despised, but they perhaps showed you some kindness. You saw them in a new light, and they, at the very least, were no longer someone you despised, but perhaps even became a friend. So everyone has experience of this. And this is even possible between competitors or between mortal enemies on a battlefield. So this shows that this relationship that one has of friend and enemy is not the natural state, but is something temporary. And moreover, if an individual you despise, or a group that you despise, if their natural state was as a despicable person, as an enemy, they would be perceived in that way by everyone. They would have a harmful impact on everyone. But that isn't the case for a single person. Every person that you've ever despised is loved by some. And equally, every person who's ever despised you, they love others. Therefore, being someone despicable is not their nature. That is your relationship with them right now. But that is not the nature of who they are. So every person that we view in a harsh light, remind ourselves, others see them as a dear friend, dear parent, a beloved child. And they as an individual have their own hopes and their own dreams. They are not naturally an evil person, an awful person. But with our internal enemies, these afflictions, none of what I've just said applies. They only cause harm. They cause harm to whomever they arise in whatever circumstance. They are never someone's friend. They are never someone's protector. For our afflictions, their natural state is to cause harm. This is the case for all afflictions. It's not the case for external enemies.
Dine za da nga zhe zhao ngone ngoma de da nga zhe shen simjen so so lia ne jin di zhao ngoma de mares je za da zhao ngoma de nga zhe so so yu nyom mo ba de res je za di gi du da dong nga zhe ga nga ti go res de yin za da de ne ge sam da je zhao ngoma yin ba de da ni so so yu yu ge de sha she da di mo nga ya ma ri ba de nyom mo ba de su nga zhao ngone di re do sam be ge sam da ha ko wa je je da shen bar zhen 最大了是现在的怕牛毛把的但还我的那电子牛毛把卷的的那通知呢但牛毛把的你不电子牛毛把的选拔没把所以帮呀等到来选备制度最绿节的别最节节你不电子公布的是你不电过的是我的
This has to be recognized so that we let go of shifting our blame and our focus where it's inappropriate, but rather recognize that our actual enemies are to be found within us, our own afflictions. When one does truly recognize this, what's expressed in our second line will arise in a heartfelt and determined manner. From today, I will strive to definitely destroy it. This then is a firm and definite conviction that now that I've seen my enemy, now that I know who my enemy is and where it resides, I will strive relentlessly to destroy it.
제비 갑라 댕갑 디디 디세스 올다 댕갑 아니 가르용 거세네 동안 자타 유르요 강기 장스 지레 가브레레 어다딩아 되는데 어지시 칼라세 제 튕기 야고 민도세다 튕기 야고네 제게 캬기도 사지 캬기도 세다 캬비 동아 아니 강아 아니 지가 칼라 야고마르베 강아 예 수부도스 나기도세 나에게 강아 데네기 따강아 막 지기 다 말아 요시베레스 용그리에서 동아 자타 강기장 데네 유베깔라가 응아서 가르스면서 어다딩아 이체 세데 땅아서 저와르파타 응에디 줍투사 말레스 그래서 나가야 직념는 제알라 되사다 공자사 야고 상스 사제 야고 민도사 나가야 최 튕기니 강아도사다 나가야 수부 대부 민도사다 데네기 아니 대제 사제도 bennom시 장모도 캬기도 써야 돼. 내내게 bennom시 사오도 기부면도 써야 돼. 내내게 또 강화에 돈에 내내게 연구를 돼. 내내게 이체 써야 된다. 두신 어당에 용사 말했으면 저와 바쳐야다 니루스 당에 투사 말했으면 배셈 흉제 두스 마지막 지교 말했어 마지막에 니네 강아 충서 용구를 때 강아들이 파체도 쓰여지네 반직 배제제네 디링 안에 지금 냠는 지고를 해서 니루 미규를 뭐 주고 했어 니루 미규스 되네게 이체 받은 이마 강아들이 때 충충충지 태바들이야 이루바의 이체 탕체제 다전사 말에 용사 말에서 셈 흉제 지교 말했어 마지막에 되네 강아 충주들이 파 네 캐도 쓰여지네 그 쇠바제 쇠두바제 아니 냠는 지고를 배주시 냠는 지고를 했어야죠.
When one really comes to recognize that our enemy abides within, then this commitment will arise that from today I will strive to definitely destroy it. But you really add to our resolve, be wide-eyed, that this will not be quick, it will not be easy. Many problems and hardships will be experienced. It's not sufficient merely to recognize the enemy. The enemy has to be defeated. This enemy that's been abiding within, dominating us, deceiving us for lifetimes. Its destruction will not come easily nor painlessly. We will experience problems. The third line, no matter what multiple further sufferings arise. So once making this commitment, from today I will definitely destroy it, no matter what multiple further sufferings arise. So expect there to be hardship. One's life is difficult. One sometimes experiences suffering relating to the weather, sometimes in relation to resources, perhaps even serious financial difficulties, one struggling to eat. Or one may experience illness and worry because of illness. So there are many, many sufferings that we can and will continue to experience. But the commitment that needs to be made is that will not shaken our resolve. The fourth line, I will, needless to say, not be pessimistic nor disheartened. With one's commitment to strive from today to definitely destroy this enemy that abides within, one develops a resolve not to become negative, not to adopt a defeatist attitude, not to think that this is too much for me, it's beyond me. This is the level of firm and definite conviction and unwavering attitude in the face of the adversity that will come, a determination to forbear, because we know what has to be done and what will be attained by destroying this enemy that abides within.
Dinegi 당은 갑을리 dineg ngosu강아 체바 용구로와 dineg 체나 어dan가지 두사마라서 기루바데 이단 체바 갑을리 ngo수마테바나 dineg 제게 섬도 어딜 드로인데 사실 남지 참고랭아 지고 차와 강아 체게서 어딜 드로 남지 빼 장무레 된하데 장위 강아 체게 용구 말했어 비게 아데 dinegi 아댕이 용구 말했어 비게 지투 말했어 비게 다 소소게 마제 강나 강아 말은 dineg 섬다지 지게 용구 말했어 비 바지 마제 용구로와 dineg자 아주 되니게 강한 것을 채워받아 되니 있네. 예술에 동화디게 되는데 동화 춘춘 집에 파 당도 렌제 동화 달린 유세 봐야지. 자기로 와다가서 냠는 제배 동화 달린 유세 봐. 되니게 갑들 동화 당도 렌제 파직 수사 봐. 될 쇠제네. 다 디링 지게 녀모 다오 코와 토마면에 다디 봐도 코와로 코르트겐지 녀모 봐 디레샤. 체 될이네 라마기버스에 셴마기버스에 등하는 녀모 봐 디레샤. 제자다 공연몽바데 매번 마쇠 받은 코발레 타에 탑균이 민도 제자는 연몽바데 파니버 땡제 빵바 이내다 다 지금 코발레 탈 땡이 대와 두고래 랑야 땡이 두도 셴래야 판바 두고래 심비 연단 통요거네 아 디링 데데 디네 강아 충춘 채바질래 땅에 디니게 단다 쳔보 주야지 여봤나 이 강아 디 충춘 데다 네바 직발 뢰다제 네데 데네 쇠바 제 능이 냠는 지긴 심비기다 배제제제 루시는 냠는 제 오래에서 숨을.
So we're being encouraged here to be wide-eyed, to recognize that this is not a process that's quick nor easy. We will experience hardships. And from the hardships, there is the danger that we will be deceived by the afflictions again. We're being deceived by a view such as, this is too difficult. Today, I'm in too much physical pain. Maybe the weather's awful, or I'm ill, or I'm hungry and therefore I'm hangry. All of this is very possible. But have a strong heart. First, beforehand, recognize this will happen. Hardships will be experienced, and that's okay. Every practitioner encounters hardships. The skill is in how one deals with them. And a skillful way to deal with the hardships you encounter is to see them as for what they are. They are not a big deal. Especially when one looks across the expanse of immeasurable time, innumerable lifetimes, then whatever hardships one experiences is not only fleeting, but it's insignificant. It's not a big deal. Then that will help calm the mind, and then patience becomes a lot easier. So look beyond this life. Also, take into account these afflictions have been hurting you, deceiving you for lifetimes. So of course, this will continue for now. But now I have this opportunity. I have developed this knowledge, and I've developed some strength of mind. So let me continue to be guided by my knowledge, guided by my conviction, and not be deceived by my afflictions. Knowing that each time I let the concern, the worry go, I become more habituated to a virtuous response. My habitual response, that habituation, weakens. So now I can break down another wall in my suffering, and I can gain ever more light, ever more freedom within. Now is my chance to weaken the hold these afflictions have had on me. So in this way, develop a way of thinking that's positive, that inspires you, and does not take the suffering that arises in your mind as being particularly serious, as being a big deal, when it just is not.
Dini that six dambo di nangozuki nega bring sosugi jiki dawa mitin bige dawa delia and jiki sosulia lulia jiki ne naza denike shengi dada dungla sona popoje sosul lu naza ne naza jomba ina ba dunga de kedo suejene pa dawa de jomgi sini and ma jagudo bezushi ni jido kedo dunga le kedo sueje bezushi tudo was 제가 데니게 된다 충충직이야 소수기 류레 강아체게 강아디게 케둥아디게 케도 소에제 배수 지구여 봐이나 자옹 엄마 다 하나주기 땡기 동아제행 기디나 동아제행데 녀모바디레 제가 디파니 보때 곰바이나 때 된다 첨보 쉬우 증언의 탈바다 탄지킴 땡기 대화 톱톱 여기 된다 첨보 쉬우 줍투야 여긴 데니게 냠냠는 제제 아니 거서 자오 땡기 라신게 거서래 뉴다도 동아솔 네버치겐 더 오마디 반 지게 방야라 데네 데서스 강아 여바티데 다 제도 쇠진의 바 지게 공제 년보된 공고에디 시화요 말해서 뭐지고 시화요 말해서 뭐지고서 지단 당부 배대다 딩이베 된다 춘춘질려 소소 강아한테 배다 동아 계도 쇠진의 배저진의 파마자 두고도 와서 더 춘춘질려 지사다 안주 된지 다 라신게 다 기디나 동아 제힌데 뇽모바텔라 동아 춘춘지 루셈네 데네 강아 춘춘 제벤데 델데 인데 인소다 데 고체도 쇠제 데 뇽모바 뇽보 덴지 파 뇽모바디 인지 민지 마좀 봐도 안 파 지기 칠로 죄죄고야다 또 지교 말에 기루 받아 탕체 받아다 준산 말에 준삼 균에 마다 버진 배죄제는 냠는 저거래서 숨거다
way to read these two verses together is to reflect that in society, people are encouraged to stand up and deal with hardships, and they're praised for doing so. Yeah, we can call to mind whether it's illustrations of soldiers in battle or sports people enduring hours of pain in their training and then in their actual sporting event. and recognize how the society encourages them, and they thereby encourage themselves too, dealing with these hardships. They recognize that they have a good chance of overcoming these hardships. And they do so because they have a goal in mind, an objective they want to achieve. So us, as spiritual practitioners, we need to develop a similar resolve. And to help develop that resolve, recognize that the kinds of sufferings that we generally experience in our everyday are pretty minor, especially compared to what people involved in armed conflict are experiencing. So when we do experience physical pain, illness, or discomfort of some type and worry from that, it's not about dismissing that, but it's about not being overwhelmed by it. And thereby helping to have the strength of mind to guard yourself from becoming overcome by the afflictions. And the second way to approach this, the first is comparing oneself to what others endure for their goals. The second way is to compare your goals to theirs. Theirs are temporary, they're very real and valid to them. But what we are trying to do is gain freedom, liberation from these afflictions, from suffering. And to do so that we can become a genuinely remarkable person, a person who can have a positive impact on the life of countless others. This is our eventual goal. To be such a person, though, an indispensable prerequisite is to subdue one's own mind, to gain freedom from these afflictions. As a person who's liberated from suffering, we will be able to talk with authenticity, and others will be inspired by our example. In this way, we can ease the suffering of all. So our goal is much greater than those of people in the world. And what we are usually needing to deal with, these frustrations and desires, they're minor compared to what people are enduring in the world. Therefore, it is entirely possible for us, and there's no need for us to become pessimistic or disheartened or to develop a defeatist attitude.
Jazada dene zada nyomo be gyön dige du che samda che da nyomo be gi nyembo tenje da nyomo ba le ya ji be zhe xin no gom gu re se sung da gom na lo ju mo su chi mo su sung go ma de nan ba gom gu re se sung go ba.
We need to meditate on this to recognize what the afflictions are, the role they play, and how they pervade us. So the text here doesn't use the term meditation, but this is what we need to do. Develop habituation through meditation to recognizing that the enemy abides within.
제상 콘트기 규현 삼다제 콘트세데 게나 라마기바 수고도 셴메기바 수 디 콘트기 데보텔라 라신이가 누가 용도와 세베 삼다제 다 콘트세데 규네 기메 셈베다 콘트세데 규네 기메 아 셈베 삼다이디 다디 얀 콘트기 계기 순고를 년보식 차고를 순고를와 디제 안디제 한 삼다제 한 콘트게바나 라마게 베 셴지 콘트게바나 셴디게 콘트게바나 코 마기바 차데 제자 디니기 미셴기 소소리아 직된지 파 콘트게 잡리아 이제다 콘트게서나 강아제다 코 콘트게도 지자 콜리아 기고요마 인제 선베가 인지고 셴리아 셴기 소소로 콘을 룸sup다 되야다 된 제베나 코다 콘트게샤 콘트게나 기부요 말에 강아 요르다 그 기부요 인자 콜 밀랑 요 말씀이 콜이야 인지 공부이나 제가 디 콘트기 년보 차고 당은 내가 콘트 가고 제가 소수기 콘트기 균 통제 소술이야 콘트기네 야명의 콘트기 메야 선배 삼다야다 미셴기 콘트 통화기 소술이야 안지게 지기 측수부터 되는게 통용도 소수들 파 콘트 말랑와지 어디 콘트기나 말라 콘트기나 안지게 미셴리야 동남교 돼야 돼 측수셔야 돼 차로도 콜에 되네 차로 밀랑와 요마 인제다 콘트 상황도就是인제아 선배 삼다베나 제가 고 디거스 되는 삼다는 파 콘트 기고 말에 콜에 파초래 잠바다 인지기 해도 콘르 기고마 제자디 소소리 콘르 기에 가고래 제자 소수기 콘르 기에 등이 콘르 미루 콘르랑 메 셈베 삼다이드 소수 콘르 기에 가고래 현지 소소리 기엔지 콘르 기에 냥아 요디 파서들레 잠니지 곰바 삼다베네 콘르 기에 가고 제자 디니게 삼다베 소수기 콘르 바가야지 제자 미 콘르 냠보 된지 콘르 마기에 탑람 두신 삼다디다 냠는 제사디 직디 차올 되는 샤고와
Whilst the text here isn't talking yet about antidotes, let's talk a little further. I spoke earlier tonight about the antidote to conscientiousness. And now, relying on conscientiousness, one can then also rely on antidotes to specific afflictions, such as, let's take the one of anger. So first one needs to think about anger, to recognize that it's pervaded by faults, so that it's very clear to us, in no circumstance is anger justified. It's never our friend, it's never our protector, it only causes harm. And it causes immediate harm to the angry person, and as soon as that anger is expressed in any way, that harm is spread to those around them. When we recognize that clearly in relation to our own lived experience, how our own mind feels even when slightly annoyed, we recognize that just the mere arisal of anger destroys any peace of mind, any good mood we may have had, it's gone. Then we can very easily, when we've seen it with the role anger plays within ourselves, we can understand others. That when we encounter someone either directly or someone we observe through media who is afflicted, for example, with anger, we can understand that that person right now is suffering. That person right now is feeling in a way that I have experience of. When my mind has been consumed with anger, I know how they're feeling. And I know they don't want to feel like that. Just like when I'm upset, I don't want to feel like that. So this person that I'm observing now, I know in their heart they long for happiness. They are angry because things aren't as they want. How do they want things to be? In a way that brings them happiness. They are yearning for happiness, but because they are enslaved by their afflictions, in particular by anger right now, they have destroyed their own happiness and they are suffering intensely. Recognizing that this being before you is an immense pain, the natural response to that understanding is love and compassion for them. And love and compassion is an antidote to anger. It's a skillful antidote to anger. It comes about through understanding, firstly, one's own mind. And then, to the extent one understands one's own mind, one will understand the mind of others, the situation they are in. And just like you don't want to suffer, nor does this person. Just like you don't want the pain of annoyance or frustration or anger, nor does this person. Compassion can arise then for the suffering being before you.
Denige conversation as to some when some mother as a queen share how some when as a hakoyaji queen how to me Piam Yama na Chung Gabla, Dictum Chishite, na Jajilia, and on the power chilo padros and Nimiji Alia Biscuitus and Yambers New Chilwa, I'll just on him. Ninte said, Nila Walanyade. And Ganzam Masache, Purua, then Sahel Sena Shenyat, and Jella Punya Achales, they didn't Pavagi Achal Kopsika, John Yam Kopsika, Sashosa. Then he had Chasangara South and Picket, that the Chapaki to Chadu daughter, Nana Sawa some jaggy, then he said, taking me some corn last year, the Payusha, Palma. Usually they didn't do corn like Usha. Then Jezel Jell, she means such and Jell corn sang, she patar the Mindu, she means such. She said, did you go wood however, that's some tavena? She said, the nigger corn society, so sugi, the Chasangana was a bit delay, chapake. That chapake, actually, a coffee, the taking me and big that, corn la, details and big that, Dimate, Dondala, corn lanche, corn la. They corn on the pie you shachere. Jenny Digi, Jenny, and Devil got as in a Sayamara de Dangajil Jondarwa, just a corona do Yonche, Ning Achal Tig Medicine, Achal Lungtum, but Achal Maki was Yodi, Dian to Yongrua, and the concept of Disayamara Jongrua. Just on the corner that do send some time, or did you call on about him? Bad that it is a corona, did you want in this regular assembly that she didn't to get that some time when she know how would the Pigelet, Piget, Piginale, or anything given the 용고를 세배 송샤 바텔레 두셔 삼단 된 예마게 소소기도 지게되게 전스타인 오 당원이랑 코르세디 배 두자디네 노트시부 레도아디 랑마기바 셴미기바 제부 용라야지마도 캡사라 민도 아셈비게 다 무여라 퇴로 지네 용도 하는
The time to reflect on this is not when one's mind is dominated by the afflictions, but when one is calm. In particular, at a time perhaps like now, when one is inspired by the Dharma, when one's quiet at home reflecting on the Dharma, that's the time to think about this. Then the mind is spacious, and you can approach this and delve into it deeply. So I'll give an example from when I was studying. So when I was studying about the faults of the afflictions, I recalled a time back in my childhood when I was angry. And this was excellent because I had an example that I could go back to. And it was just so clear to me, the sequence of the afflictions playing out and their inevitable result. So when I was a child, my father, he was going out, as he did. He was a farmer, so he was going out to the fields. He gave me a biscuit. And this was a very remote area where there weren't shops, and a biscuit was something to be valued. It was something that one rarely was given. So I was a young boy, and I was very pleased to have this biscuit, and I held onto it tightly. But when my father was leaving, he said to one of my elder sisters that he had given me a biscuit and that we were to share it. So she came in wanting to share the biscuit with me, but I was having none of it. This was my biscuit, and I was going to enjoy it by myself. But she was insistent because our father had given it to us to enjoy. So I got angry. And with my anger, my fist tightened, and I destroyed the biscuit. It crumbled in my hand. The crumbs fell out of my hand. The only person who benefited was our cat. The cat ate the crumbs. But my sister was upset because I had been unkind. I was unhappy because I was angry. So years later, when reflecting on this incident, it was very clear attachment arose from the self-centered attitude of miserliness, and from that anger, and from that destruction. It was so clear. Only loss was experienced by the affliction. So remembering this then, years later, when my mind was calm and tranquil, I saw the faults of anger and the sequence of the afflictions, and I made the determination then to no longer respond in this way. So in this way, I encourage you too to reflect on the afflictions. Use experiences from your own life, from your own day, and generate this determination to gain freedom from these afflictions.
Dawong Omadi, that do Sinanga Samtang Gigi, the Yomobati, Deja Kondrangaya, Mareva Yomobati, the Tangoma did it was some Samta, Diligun Dushineda, Gidine, Gunjima, the Pendovas Kaimido, some Bedadi, Nimbo Dinge, the Jimapa, the Tamidu, Simbi Nimbo Dinge, Bayaki, Besichi Ores, and Gabriel Nimbo di Besichi, Gabriel Sosa Gangadu, Tevine, Paji Gangadi, Kedu, Sush, Pa. Down to Lynch part, Yamlin Chewar, spending Azuki, Denegi, Dushine, Tubora Jana Ganga down to Lingitunga, Chen down the link to us, in deleted that, then that Shimbu do at the down to Link Chewar, yes, Dondala Dushine, Yomopa, Dushin, Gun, that Yomopa, Gun, Tony, Tony, did that Yomopa, the Banya, Besuchin, Yambot in Besuchi, yes, don't that disorder. And the didn't get the she had it in the share.
So I encourage you to really recognize that our sole enemy abides within. It's our own afflictions. It's never an external person or a situation. Solely these afflictions, how we respond, to others and to circumstances. Recognizing that also, it's imperative to recognize that the afflictions never bring any benefit. There is no upside to the afflictions. They don't make us strong and courageous. They do not protect us. Their very nature is to harm. They harm the person whose mind is afflicted. They harm those who are around them as those afflictions are expressed. They only lead to pain. Recognizing that point too, then develop the stable determination. I will gain freedom from them. And I will do so with a stable resolve that when my afflictions are being challenged, I will experience some suffering, some unease inside at trying to go against what for so long has seemed natural. I'm going to try and go against these habit patterns which I'm so familiar with that they seem natural to me. So when I go against them, it will make me unsteady. But that's okay. When afflictions arise, I'll keep my mind relaxed about them, just seeing them as the arisal of an old friend who's no longer welcome, and just let them go. And whilst letting them go, hold in mind my goal of liberation from these slave masters. Develop that determination for freedom from these slave masters, which only have power because we give it to them. By letting them go, their power goes. Their hold on us goes. So I encourage you, engage in these reflections again and again. Have a happier mind, a more peaceful mind. So then we can conclude here, but if you have questions, there's still a few minutes, so please feel free to ask. Then thank you. We'll conclude there tonight. Thank you.